Welcome to our virtual roundtable series by GlocalNet. Thank you so much for taking time to watch this today. We have a topic that is crucially important. Burnout in pastors, mental illness. Are you dealing with your mental health? Such a heavy topic that has this stigma about it that we need to break down. So we have Pastor Greg Surratt from Seacoast Church joining Bob Roberts today to talk really about that. So thank you so much for joining me today. We care about you. We love you. So if you have any questions, just email us at info@glocal.net, and we'll have a pastor reach out to you to talk about how we're a family of pastors together on this journey, because you are not alone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And here is Pastor Greg Surratt and Pastor Bob Roberts.
Hello, I'm Bob Roberts with GlocalNet and another virtual roundtable. Really excited about this one because of the person, frankly, that I'm doing it with. I got to know Greg Surratt from Seacoast Community Church back in the 2000s. We were in a project together with a man named Bob Buford called Burning Bush, and it was during that time that art started getting its feet underneath itself. And it was also during that time that GlocalNet started getting its feet under itself. There's so many of us, Acts 29, Neil Cole, Dave Gibbons. I go down the list. We're still in the game. And I'm so grateful for Bob. And I miss him so much because he poured into us. And we're talking about something that's very sensitive today. How do we in the ministry not crash, burn out? We both had the privilege of knowing Darrin Patrick. He was in the Acts 29 cohort with Bob Buford. And that's how I got to know Darrin. And then I got to know him in St. Louis through some other ways. And I loved him and I appreciated him. And the reality is, the tragedy is, what happened with Darrin has happened to a lot of people the last few years. Greg, I'm curious. In your opinion, I mean, you and I'm 62. I don't know how old you are, but
I'm 64, so
okay.
I'm the old man in the room.
All right. So we've been out here a little while.
Yeah.
And sometimes guys will ask me, Bob, was it this way back in the day? And it was. Guys would burn out, they would crash, there would be suicide, but I honestly don't think it was this much.
It doesn't seem like it, Bob, and thanks for having this conversation. I didn't realize that it was at the Burning Bush that we met. In fact, Bob Buford threatened us with taking our money and status away if we ever admitted to being in that group. Do you remember that?
That's what I liked about it. I mean, dude, you had to perform or you were out.
Exactly. But I don't know whether it's harder or not. It feels like it. It feels like it. There are so many things that have changed since you and I were young and got started. You know, you've got, for one thing, when a family left your church, which also always rips your heart out. Okay, you just kind of start there. That's one of the rejection things that we have. And I was to a counselor a while ago, and they said that my rejection meter is pretty high. Maybe it's because I've been in the battle so long. But when a person left your church, they just left your church. Now they posted on Facebook about the new church they're going to and how wonderful it is. And they actually preach the word there. And they found friendship. And then you look through the comments, and there's a lot of their friends are people that you minister to, and it hurts. It really does. It does a toll psychologically. And then with social media, again, and you baptized 4 people last weekend, and you open up your Instagram account, and somebody baptized 4,000 people. You feel like, who am I, and what? Maybe I just hang it up. And I'm exaggerating to some degree, but it's there. It's so much easier to do what is detrimental to your mental health, which is to compare yourself to other people. And there's the pressures of church growth and And, a lot of those things I don't think were that prevalent when we got started.
I'm curious. I mean, let's unpack. You just said a lot of profound things. Rejection.
Mm-hmm.
You know a little bit about our ministry, where we
Right.
intentionally desegregated our church, became a multi-ethnic church. We reached out to the Muslim community. That won me a lot of Baptist friends. Being
Bet it
Baptist. So, I mean, really what you're talking about, things being posted about you that are false, it got to a point I didn't even respond to them because if I did, there would just be something else. Have you experienced rejection, Greg, in your ministry? Have you had to deal with that?
Oh, I already talked about the rejection that everybody deals with when, we're built as relational creatures, and when you attach to families and then, they go, that's hard, and there's rejection there. My journey was from a Pentecostal background. You're Baptist, I'm Pentecostal, and I wanted to reach unchurched people and did a non-denominational church. And for, a great number of years, I was Ichabod, the glory has departed. And it was hard. It was really hard when those who were at your roots no longer respected you or said bad things about you. And yeah, I mean,
I think that tribal thing, when your own tribe pushes back on you, I think for me, that was the most painful thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that Muslims would question me or people from another culture or tribe. But man, when your own tribe, those that nurtured you, like you said, you came from their root, it's tough.
It is.
It's hard to handle that. I was raised, a lot of Baptists would ask me, Bob, why do you do this stuff? Where did it come up with? And I told them, you raised me this way. I believed everything you told me as a little kid. And so why was I going to do ministry any other way? And I think what happened, one thing that happened with you and I was we were coming, not the Great Awakening, but I would say a global and cultural awakening was taking place when we were in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer saw our faith just in context of America. And you got the different denominations. We saw it in context of the world, Vietnam, an openness of media. And I think we did not anticipate the full impact of living your life out there for the whole world. And then you're challenged with the truth of the gospel. Are you going to love these people or hate them? And
Mm-hmm.
how do you do that?
Mm-hmm. And then we've got such a divided political scene right now.
Oh, man.
And I know the other day I did a little post about what do we do when we open up, church. It's coming soon. And I made a funny comment. I thought it was funny. I do humor. Okay? And I thought it was brilliant. I thought
It's
it was
dangerous.
brilliant. And one of the first comments on Facebook was, I am so disillusioned by this church right now. I love this church up until a few minutes ago when you posted this. And, assigned me even a political slant that wasn't mine, but you got to, it's a minefield that you've got to walk through. And, at the same time, though, as leaders, we've got to, I say we've got to put our big boy panties on and accept the leadership role that we have. And I think we're not unique to the pressure that we face. But I think we do face a lot of pressure, especially to have good mental health.
What do you think's going on with the pastorate today? I mean, we talked about some of the things about rejection, living a public life. And I agree with what you're saying because there are school superintendents, there are mayors, there are other people in leadership positions. Tim Scott,
Mm-hmm.
senator, great guy that I respect a lot, has a lot of respect for you. And those guys face pressure too. It's not just us. Sometimes I think in the ministry, I like what you said about putting on your big boy pants, because I think sometimes in ministry we get the idea there's this victim mindset. Boy, we got it harder than anybody else. I don't know we do.
No, I don't think we do. Any leader, they say that, somebody told me one time that, on 95% of the decisions that a leader of a company, big company, has to make, a reasonably adjusted, intelligent, high school graduate could make. But that's not what they pay you for. They pay you for the other 5%.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we are too. And so, I don't want to be a victim. This is the greatest thing on the planet that we could be called to. It's an amazing thing. During this time of where everything is up in the air, where there's confusion and people are afraid, we offer hope. And what a privilege that is. It's an incredible privilege. And so, I love that. I love that. But at the same time, I watch around me, so much discouragement in ministry, and then see occasionally, somebody that succumbs to that. And that's disheartening in itself.
What are some things, Greg, pastors can do for good mental, spiritual, emotional, moral health? You said I'm Baptist, and I am. But the crazy thing is, I work all over the world with all kinds of people, very sensitive situations, trying to protect Christians and other religious minorities, and even share the gospel in those contexts. And one of the things that I've learned in the midst of all of that is I got to be a healthy person. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the Holy Spirit is everything. For me, I believe in all the gifts, practice them as God gives them to me for whatever. But I really believe this is a spiritual thing. And sometimes I feel like we've gotten away from that. Even as pastors, it's like these 3 things, these 4 steps, do this, do that. I don't know, what role do you think spiritual disciplines and the role of the Holy Spirit plays in all of this?
Well, mental health is tricky. It's easy to say it's one thing, or it's this thing, or what is it that takes a great leader out? Well, it's nuanced. It's very tricky. I think it can come back to one thing, and I learned this when I was first in ministry. I went into a time of depression. Never been depressed in my life, ever. And 3 weeks into my first pastorate, I began to get depressed. I couldn't talk to anybody. Who does that? I'm in a very small rural town. I'm the guy with the answers. Who does the guy with the answers talk to? There was nobody. I couldn't admit it to anybody, and just severe depression. And came out of that about a 6-month process, and learned that in my case, and I think it's all cases, but it's different ways you get there, is that I was believing lies and then acting on them. Believing that that I didn't have what it takes, believing that I wouldn't have the word for the next week. That was such a pressure for me at the time. We were preaching then Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and always had to have the word. I was overwhelmed by that. I don't think that's healthy. Can I just get on a bandwagon?
Go
here?
for it.
So many of my friends before this COVID that had growing churches were preaching 3, 4, 5 times a weekend. You weren't created for that. Okay, that's a design for disaster. And one of the things we're learning in COVID is that video works. Yeah. And one of the things I'm challenging my friends to is say, let's get a good, healthy, rhythm let's learn something from what we've just gone through. But it's believing lies that here's a lie about that, is that if I'm not in front of the people, that they'll think that I'm less than what I really could be, or maybe I'm not. There's a guilt thing. I'm not getting my job done. If I really could get my job done, I would step up. And how many ever times, I'd speak on a weekend or in a weekly basis, and none of that is true. None of it is true. And so I had to learn and continue to learn every day. What is the truth? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, not conform to the lies of this world. What is the truth? And then act on it. Now, here's the problem. For me, I could do that organically. You know, it was okay. I read a book, basically. My dad encouraged me. And the book was Telling Yourself the Truth. And
That's a great book.
Oh,
I love that book.
It's number one in my mind.
Bacchus, right?
Bacchus. That book saved my life because I didn't have a counselor. I didn't have anybody I could go to. But I could get through it.
Well, hey, let's just stop right there for a quick second.
Sure.
I think that's a lie. Pastors who think, I can't go talk to a counselor.
Oh, it's a total lie.
I think one of the best things you can do is go talk to a counselor.
Yeah. In fact,
what is the big deal?
On remedies, we'll talk about remedies here. You were saying, what can we do? Number one on my list is talk to a counselor. And when I say organic, I was able to get my brain going in the right direction. But there are some people who, because of a sustained way of thinking or because of just physics, that there's a systemic thing that they can't get to that point. And I think you need to go to a counselor and find out, do I just need to adjust my thinking here? Do I need some medication? We've got a pastor on our staff that's an awesome guy, and he has a systemic issue that creates depression. Okay, he's got to take his medicine all the time. So mental health is tricky. It's very
okay. Wait a second. You said something else. I can't ignore that. So here we've got a pastor. You're saying he's very gifted,
mm-hmm.
and he's taking meds to help deal with his depression.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it because we're so afraid. Oh man, you're supposed to be filled with the Spirit. You're supposed to have Jesus. What's wrong with you, man?
Right. Yeah.
I love it.
That's a bunch of baloney. I mean, God can and does heal. Okay. God can and does sustain. But you know what? There are times when we need to use our brain and take the available things for us that will help us to get to a place where we can stand on our own, or maybe you can never. Maybe, what if there's something in your brain that, here's an interesting one, Bob. So I went to the doctor 3, 4, 5 years ago. We thought I was having strokes. And so long story, but I went to the doctor. They did a weekend full of tests. And at the end of the weekend, the neurosurgeon came in and talked to my family. And he said, I've got good news, not as good a news, better news. What do you want? So, well, let's go. What's the good news? He said, it's not a stroke. It is atypical migraines, which kind of emulated a stroke. And through some, and it was brought on by stress and some things that I was in my diet that wasn't good, that I was able to fix. The not as good a news is while they were doing the brain scans, and they did multiple ones, they said, when you were born, your brain wasn't wired up the way that it was supposed to. Later, a neurosurgeon said, that means that a portion of your brain is what we call dead. It was not wired up the way it's supposed to. He said the better news is that the amazing part of the brain is that at times it will rewire in ways that make it possible. And so my brain works, but it doesn't work like your brain. There are some things I have to live with. And the things that I have to live with, you can't take medicine for, but if you could, I would, because we're in a fallen world, man.
Yeah. We're
in a fallen world. And so mental health's tricky, but I don't want to talk too long.
No, it's good. So lies, counseling, not living as a victim. I mean, you're hitting a lot of stuff. Taking meds if you need to take them. I mean,
yeah. Well, let's talk about triggers too. And I'm not a mental health expert, but having walked with my own situation and with people for a lot of years, and then looking at Darrin so recently. And by the way, we don't know at this point exactly what the case was with Darrin. There's an investigation going on. You and I are assuming right now it may have been suicide, and that's an assumption that we can make, but we don't know for sure yet. We will know more in the next few weeks. But with a pastor or anybody else, I think Comparisons can trigger this whole thing. I think that disappointments can trigger this whole thing. We have disappointments in ourselves and our family, in the results, and all of those kind of things. Secrets can trigger things. When you have a secret, I was reading a thing the other day about secrets, and I don't even think it was a spiritual or religious thing, but it was very, very good. And it talked about the fact that even what you believe about a secret can destroy you mentally. So you've got this secret over here. Let's say in ministry, that secret is, I've got a porn addiction, or that secret is I'm actually carrying on an affair with somebody. Okay, so I've got to keep it secret, and the secrets destroy you. What do the 12-steppers say? That you're only as sick as your secrets. And here's some of the thoughts that you have. If anybody knew this, I'd be done. If anybody knew where I was on, what I'm entangled with, I could never be restored. I'm going to lose my family. And it can steamroll to such a point where you believe that, lies, that the only way out is to take your life, or that the only way out, or that the best thing for your family is that you be gone. I was listening to Dr. Cloud the other day. Dr. Henry Cloud gave our staff 2 hours of his time. Gave our staff 2 hours of his time as we're mourning together. And he was talking about suicide, and he said, we oftentimes think that, man, how could somebody be so selfish as to take their own life? And he said, it's not that. In fact, they think that it's the most loving thing that they could do because they believe a lie.
Wow.
And that's so deep. And there's so many things that we can go into, but, we need counselors. We need ministry companions. I like to say you need to.
Let's stop right there. Let's stop right there on ministry companions.
Yeah.
The way I heard about Darrin, I was working out real early. I guess, I don't know when it happened, but it happened one day. And then I heard early the next morning, and it was a mutual friend you and I have. And he just called me up sobbing. I've known this guy for many years. And he said, "Did you hear about Darrin?" I said, "No." And he told me. And he just began to talk a little bit about what he'd been through and what he was facing. And Darrin had spoke to his church planters and did a great job, but he was just, taken aback by it. And I just stopped right there, and I called him by name. And I said, "Hey, talk to me. Are you okay?
Yeah.
You thinking about hurting yourself? Be honest with me." Boy, it got deathly quiet. And it just hit me. Wow, that may be what he's dealing with. Mm-hmm. And we talked, and he's not there, but he was definitely hurting, and he's been through a rough go. Nothing will make it hard like trying to integrate a white church in the South. And he's done that with a church of thousands of people. And we got through talking. I was just trying to encourage him. And he said, "Now, hey, Bob, let me ask you something. Have you had suicidal thoughts lately?" And, he's close enough. He could ask me that. I'm close enough. I could ask him that. But still, I think, once again, you got to put your man pants on and say, "Hey, I'm not going to ignore this. I'm not going to assume you're okay," because I don't know about you, Greg. There's a lot of times people say, "How you doing, Bob?" I don't want to spill my guts.
No.
And I'm fine, but I'm not. But there's a few people that I can talk to. Dave Gibbons is a close friend. Man, we won't see one another, but man, we can call when we're down and want to, whatever. And he's there. He's that kind of friend. I've got some other friends like that. Do you have friends like that? You can just say, "Hey, I feel like crap. I want to quit. I want to become a Buddhist. I've had it."
Yes, I am very blessed. There was a time when I felt like I was alone, because it's lonely when you're building, what you do, and you ought to be a good example, but there's pressure to be a better example than you actually are. And we formed a network out of it. But Yeah, I like to say that everybody needs to sit at least one table, and now I think it needs to be multiple tables with a group of people who love you, but they're not impressed with you. Okay, because the people in your church are impressed with you, and they should be. They should be. But you need to sit at a table with people that love you desperately, but they're not impressed, and they're not afraid to ask those kind of questions. That understand. And here's what it is, Bob, though, even beyond that. So what if a guy is really has blown it big time? We don't know how to restore them. We're all about penance. We're all about do these 5 things, and then if you do it for a year, then we'll check you again, and maybe 2 years we'll let you in ministry, or maybe we won't. I don't see that in the Bible anywhere, even though I've been a part of restoration programs. We've got to have a place that is so safe that a guy can say, here's what I'm dealing with. This is what's really at the core of it. And we'll let the future take care of itself. But rather than trying to fix you, we're going to love you. We're going to pray for you. We're going to give you truth. But it's going to be in the context of close, deep, personal relationship. And I think that's so important.
What have you done good in restoration, and what have you not done as good that you would change in the way that you've done it? Because you started a lot of churches. We have. You can't relate to as many pastors as you and I have and not have to pick them up at times. My goal has frankly always been to restore someone. And then there's been times where it went fantastic. There's been other times where it didn't. What would you say in restoring someone? Here's some things to keep in mind.
I don't know. I don't know that I've got it down. We've been all over the map with it, but I think that when one extremely popular, well-known celebrity pastor, and that's another thing we could talk about, had a fall, and I didn't even know him well. I just knew him a little bit. And the Lord spoke to me. I felt like I'm a Pentecostal, so I think he still does from time to time. And I felt like the Lord spoke to me, and he said, I want you to be a friend to him, because everybody needs a friend, even when they're wrong. You know, there's plenty of people that will point out the wrong, and rightfully so. We probably need to. But he said, but I felt like the Lord said to me, so I called him. I got his phone number, and I said, everybody's running away. I'm not telling you I approve of everything you do, but I'm your friend right now. And I want to be a friend to you. And I think that was good. I think that was a win for me. And I look at the guy now, and it wasn't as much my doings as it was, other people involved with it. But I'll take rocks from people, who say, how can you, be a friend to, and he's doing whatever he's doing. Well, everybody needs a friend, even when they're wrong. But what God was calling me to be was to be a Barnabas in his life. Paul's throwing rocks at everybody, and the church doesn't believe him, and they're afraid of him, and he needs an advocate, and he needs somebody to say, you know what, I love you, and I'll be your friend. And that wears you out, to be honest with you. But I think it's very, very important.
You and I have both spoke at Exponential, and sometimes I'm always excited. I love that conference and the people who put it together. But I'm always a little nervous too, because 5,000 young screaming guys and gals, watching the stage, for they're going to start a church. It's going to be big. They're going to write books. They're going to be the next Francis Chan or Albert Tate or whoever. And I worry about that sometimes. What are we saying to those guys because the reality is most are not. I don't know how many mega churches there are now in America, but no longer even being a mega church is enough to be a celebrity. Used to it was, not anymore. There's a lot of other things that come into play. And I feel like it's come from our American culture with sports and athletic. I mean, now our preachers are our heroes,
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't for years, but now they are. It's in vogue again. What do you see in that? What do you?
Yeah, I don't think it's
push
healthy.
back?
I don't think it's healthy, but it's out there. I don't think you can, what do they say, that horse left the barn,
Yeah.
that train left the station, because of the era that we live in, that information is immediate and social media and all of that. We're going to have celebrities. And, I had to come to grips with that a little bit as our church began to grow and we created the Art Network and all of that became much more visible. And I don't like it at all. But I came to a point that, the root of celebrity is somebody who is celebrated. And I don't think it's a bad thing to be celebrated and to have a life. Hopefully it's not, the false celebration or celebration for, surface reasons, but you're going to be celebrated. I think the issue, though, is how are you going to handle that? And I think we all have to come to grips with that. There are certain practices that I do that, I try to take, especially with my local church, I try to take the mystique out of it. We've got a church with 14 campuses and, most of it's video. And so when it's video, my theory is that when we see a person on a screen, it builds it up even bigger than it is. I just met with a lady today that she was just overcome. I've never seen you in person before, and all this, it was all this celebrity stuff. Well, you can really fan the flames on that because it feels good inside. Or you can say, you know what, this will destroy me ultimately, and this is not good for the people. I do things like, I'm a bit of an extrovert, but I go stand in the foyer after I preach or after other people preach. And to me, it's hard. An extrovert loves it. For me, I'm like, oh, this is torture. But I feel like the more the people see me, the more they can see I'm just normal, just like they are. And when I hear somebody say that, you're just like me, I like that. I like that rather than, you're this image that I can't approach or I can't be. And there are all kind of things. I read a book about, I can't even remember the name of the book now, about, how to protect mystique, how to create this image. And I thought, that is sickening. That's straight from the pits of hell,
Yeah.
So I think you gotta, in your own mind, say this is not a healthy thing. It is what it is. It's there. So how am I going to deal with it?
I'm sure you've been around the world, and I have friends who have churches of 10,000 and 40,000 and a million. And I'm always amazed at those guys, how humble they are. You would never know. I mean, some of them, these days, there are a few that are global celebrities, if you will.
Yeah.
But the overwhelming majority of them, I mean, they were broke or in prison or beaten for their faith, or like Paul, constantly running. I think a lot of that, I don't know, it humbles us.
Yeah.
And it's not about how big the church is. You want to reach the lost, but it's about, am I going to survive? Am I going to live? Am I going to make it? And what that looks like. I just think our social media, I think the things that come with it, I agree, it's there. But I think it is a choice that we have to make that says, you know what, I'm not going to be the lie that I'm all the hype that it says I am. I like what John Maxwell says. He says, you're not as good as they say you are.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're not as bad as they
Not
say
as
you
bad.
are. I just love that because it.
Social media is good in several senses, but one of them is it's a great discipleship tool. I'll see a guy that I'm responsible for in some way posting stuff on social media, and it's like, okay, all right, let's talk about that a little bit. Why are you saying that? Why are you posting that picture? What are you trying to elicit here? And so I've found it to be a great tool in developing young pastors and leaders.
Will you call them out, Greg?
I do, not publicly, not at all. But I do. I'll text them. I'll call them. I'll say, hey, I saw this on social media. What's going on here? What are we thinking?
I'm concerned to some degree that pastors in America, we don't have the prophetic voice that we used to have, in the sense, I don't mean just calling out sin, but some depth. I think about, I don't know if you're familiar with David Brooks, but he just wrote a book called Second Mountain. And what does it mean to live a moral life? And he's thinking deeply about that. The guy who spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast this year, Arthur Brooks, wrote a book, Love Your Enemies. I mean, he's Catholic. And
I read about that one.
Oh my gosh. And I don't know. I wonder sometimes how we're growing the essence of ourselves, the substance of who we are, not just our ability to preach and be great theologians, but how do we grow deep as a person? I don't mean we're not all going to be a Tim Keller. That's not going to happen. He was in that group with us too, if you remember. But Tim's in his own category, you know? I mean,
yeah.
How do you grow yourself deep? You're not a shallow person.
It depends who I'm talking to. But the best I can be is the best version of me that God intended me to be. And so having people around me that, will help me with my, what do they call it, emotional EQ, with my having a right view of myself, make sure that I'm connected to a Father who loves me more than I can imagine. I love Paul's Romans 8, where he talks about, if God is for me, who possibly could be against me? I want to be there. I want to have that thought every day. I don't care what anybody's saying or doing, or this result is happening or it's not. If God is for me, what does it matter? What does it matter?
Good.
I think that's the core of it for me. And you talk about counselors. I was going to a counselor and it got too expensive, so I hired him on staff. So and he's wonderful. And he really, really, really showed me more than anything else the Father's love. How to look at, when you wake up in the morning, what's your first thought? Your first thought, and I'm not one of these guys, maybe you are, Bob. Some of my friends wake up in the morning and they're so ready for the morning and the day, and I just am not. I've usually had a hard time sleeping or whatever, and so my thoughts are negative first thing in the morning. And what he taught me was, let your first thought, you don't have to agree with every thought that comes into your brain, but make your first agreement this, that I have a Father who loves me today.
Isn't that good?
He is so impressed with me. I don't have to do anything to impress him. And he's already gone out before me on this day, and I'm going to be okay. You know what?
That's good.
That helps. That helps with your mental health right there, is to get your thinking right first thing.
But you've gone from lies when we first started talking all the way back to identity.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you this. You sparked something when you said Father. I've got several spiritual fathers.
Yeah.
Man, they've saved me. Old dudes. Now, we're not so young ourselves. So a lot of mine have died. Bob, I live here in Dallas, so Bob and I were close. We'd eat lunch. He'd speak into my life regularly. If I was struggling with something, I knew Bob probably, maybe, I don't know, but in a different way than a lot of pastors did. But I think about him. I think about other older men that have been in the ministry. Jim Hilton is a guy, he's in his mid-80s. He's in our church, pastored big churches before there were many of them. And I don't know, those older guys have held me steady. What about you?
Well, I tell you what, I'm one of the older guys now. And so
all the other guys are dying, aren't they?
Well, it's
depressing.
Okay. We are, this is the most exciting time of my life. I really believe that. When I came to a point of saying that my counselor said to me one time, he said, I don't, because I was struggling with, next generation church and all of this, and struggling with the transition that I was making. And he said, Greg, you can't build a church for the next generation. And he may be right or wrong, but that's what he said. But he said, you can build the leaders that will build the church for the next generation. And as I look at the landscape of pastors, it's almost like sheep without a shepherd. It's a lot, and because of the culture that we live in, there are a lot of fatherless, even physically, but very much fatherless spiritually. Oh, that's a whole conversation. We don't know how to be fathers. So oftentimes you'll see a father competing with a son in ministry. And we complete. We become cheerleaders. And so one of my greatest joys today is to be a father to young guys or middle-aged guys or just anybody that needs a father. And, I think you said earlier I had multiple fathers, which in the spiritual realm, you can and you need. And so, yeah, that's a whole topic. Light my candle.
Our whole network is built, GlocalNet is built on the concept of family. Because the
Mm-hmm.
truth of the matter is, you can go to any network you want that's a decent network to get what you need to start a church, however you want to start it. But at the end of the day, if you're not building family,
Mm-hmm.
man, and I'm with you, Greg, because what I realized was that there's nothing like being a father. It multiplies your ministry. I feel sorry for guys that are our age that are trying to figure out what they're going to do, in the next phase when they're not senior pastors
Right.
anymore. I don't have that challenge. I'm a pretty busy guy, but it wasn't built around my identity being at a church, and it was also built around who the father said you were. And when you're in that family, it's fun to raise up those young sons.
Oh, it is.
See 'em
Guys
run.
will call me, we plant churches, and you plant churches. And guys will call me, this happens regularly, and say, listen, I'm coming about to the end of my run with my church, and I need something else to do. What do I do? I said, well, listen, if you're serious, let me give you 10 names of young guys that are planting churches right now. You just go be a dad to them. All you do, man, text them and tell them you're proud of them. That's it. One of our conferences one year, I felt like the Lord spoke to me before the conference and just said, tell them you're proud of them. And so every guy that would come, every girl that would come, I would say, you know what, let me tell you this, I'm proud of you. And you could just, it was like, you could just see the fire light inside. And so, boy, there is a lot of times older pastors wonder if there is a place for me. Is there a place for you? Oh my goodness!
I agree with
Come
that.
on,
Wear you out.
Let's
Wear you
encourage
out.
it. Yeah.
I get to go around the world, and what I love is, the bad thing is the kind of stuff I do, sometimes we have to wear suits. But I love taking these young pastors with me and mentoring them about all kind of crazy stuff. I've actually learned I do more discipleship when they travel with me than if they're at a weekly class where I'm teaching.
Absolutely.
It's a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Only what he said publicly, but when you look back on Darrin, what was his biggest challenge? Would you say that he talked about public that you would feel comfortable talking about? What was it that caused the challenges he had at his church, and then some of the others? What was it?
Father wound.
Really?
Oh yeah. He had a dad that basically walked away from him, not physically, but emotionally and communication-wise, when he was just a young boy.
Wow.
And Darrin, all of his ministry life, was looking for a dad. Wow. And I kind of became a spiritual father to him. And so I can take on guilt of saying, well, you did real good. No, you know what? I did the best I could. And I think Darrin had some really, really good family years and really good ministry years in the last 3 or 4 years. But there was again, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, but it wasn't very hard to recognize that Darrin had a father wound. And I don't know that he ever got through it.
How did he try to deal with that?
How did he mask it?
Really?
With habits, with detachment sometimes. It's just it's hard. There would be times I would think that we would make great progress, but it was just hard for him. It was, and I think that was the root of where he was.
How are you dealing with it? I mean, that's got to be
Yeah.
painful.
Yeah, I'm grieving it. It's interesting. When Darrin died, I got the phone call from Amy. I'm the first person that she called when the police came to her house. And we were out to eat with another couple. And my wife and I both went into ministry mode. You put the uniform on, you do what you got to do. And I went to St. Louis. That night, I came back to my hotel by myself. And fortunately, there weren't other people in the hotel. There's there's nobody there if you want to go right now. There were three of us that went out, but we were in separate rooms and even separate parts of the hotel for some reason. And I just sobbed and cried and groaned, and I was glad nobody was in the room next door to me or two rooms down. And in the middle of that, I just came to a realization that when my mother died, when other friends have died, life had to go on for me. I had to keep doing what I'm doing. Fortunately, I'm in the luxury of a situation where I didn't have to. Well, I did speak the week after Darrin died. That was my time up. But I told the Lord, I said, I'm going to grieve this. I don't want to have residue, that I'm going to have to deal with years from now. And so I've been going through the grieving process, and through the feeling guilty to mad to, I was sitting on an airplane just yesterday or 2 days ago, 3 days ago, whatever. And all of a sudden it just washed over me, and I started to cry. And, but what I know is that's okay. That's all right. That's a part of the process. And so I have chosen to embrace rather than to mask the process that's going on. But thanks for asking.
I think, Greg, I look back at a guy named Leighton Ford. I don't know if you know who Leighton is or not, but I think I'm here today because of Leighton. He handpicked in the early 90s. I was in my 30s, and he handpicked 20 of us to pour into, me and Gibbons and several others that you would know their names if I were to go down them. But we would meet every 4 or 5 months, and we'd all fly into Charlotte. And before we met, we'd have to take all these different kinds of tests and psychological tests and ministry tests. And he said, guys, really, you're going to learn how to do ministry without me. But I want your mind, your money, your marriage, your morals, and your ministry wind up intact. That's my goal. And I remember they had psychologists there, counselors, every kind of, they had revivalists there. I mean, all kinds of things. It was like a 2-year process. It was phenomenal. But everybody would show up. They're all excited, talking about their ministries and what's going on. I mean, by noon to the next day, everybody was depressed. They were going all over our personality profiles, and we were all screwed up, every single one of us.
Yeah.
And I mean, they knew things about you. I mean, they knew. I'm from deep East Texas. We don't talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And they knew things about me that I'd never told anyone, and I was offended. How would you even know that? But these tests would make it out real. And I remember the next morning, Leighton wanted to have breakfast because he was always, if he'd see we were upset, he was talking to us. So I was sitting there with him having breakfast, very depressed. And he said, "What's wrong with you, Bob?" And I said, "Well, man, I'm screwed up. There's this and there's that." He looked at me and he started smiling. He said, "You think me and Billy," he's Billy Graham's brother-in-law. I said, "You think me and Billy aren't screwed up?" And I said, "Well, yeah, y'all have it together." He said, "No, Bob, we are so screwed up."
Yeah.
He said, "That's why we have all these rules and the way that we live." He said, everybody's screwed up. There's just those that are willing to admit it and those that aren't. And you know, if I could say one thing to young pastors today, I'd say this. You probably are screwed up. It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. There's a bunch of us old dudes out here like me and Greg. We care about you. We love you. We will be here for you.
That's right.
And I don't care if it's counseling or medication or being in a cohort of guys. Man, be healthy. Don't take your life. Don't destroy your marriage. Keep your pants on or put them back on, whatever it is. Let's deal with our crap.
Yes.
And let's move forward. Is there
Yeah,
anything you would want to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is you are a blessed man to have a man like that to look into your life and to take a group of young guys and say, you're going to be all right ministry-wise. We're going to do the best we can to. It's called soul care.
Yeah.
And Bob, that's what I'm giving the rest of my life to. And I think we can make a difference in a lot of guys' lives. And you know what? If two old screwed up men like you and me can be used by God to do that, anybody can do well in life. And I really do believe that.
I do too, Greg. Hey, would you mind praying for guys and gals in the ministry that are watching this right now? Would you mind? Pray us out.
God, I thank you for today, for this divine appointment. I thank you for Bob and what he's meant in my life in just the time I've known him, and what he means in so many lives of pastors and leaders all over the world. And God, I pray for those who are watching right now or listening, wherever they happen to be, and so many of us are thinking thoughts that are not generated by you. Lord, just arrest our minds in this moment. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Even with the issues and challenges we have, we are loved by you. Our deficiencies aren't a surprise to you. And you're more than able to minister through us, even in our sometimes crippled state. And so, Father, I pray that your kingdom would come and your will would be done in our lives, in our cities, in our marriages, in our families. Lord, I just come against the power and the thoughts that the enemy would plant. And Lord, we receive your thoughts and your mind and your love for us today. Lord, I pray that your kingdom would come and your will would be done. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.